Hi, you're watching Floyd Steinberg's YouTube channel. Today, let's take a look at MicroDexed Touch, the evolution of MicroDexed, which I reviewed on this channel 2 years ago. Luckily, today's sponsor, PCBWAY, was kind enough to provide me with the enclosure and the printed circuit board for this project. More on them later in this video. So if you think that's an interesting video topic, let's take a look together. Here we go.
MicroDexed Touch is a DIY groovebox, so to get a hold of it, you need to build it yourself. So head over to the project's GitHub page and download the latest release and grab the schematics and the latest bill of materials. Here is that list, including the actual prices I paid for all the parts. And for no particular reason, let's do this as a Star Wars scroller. As you can see, you'll end up somewhere between 100 and 200 credits, depending on what you already have at home. All of the parts on the list are standard electronic components that can easily be sourced from Amazon or AliExpress, with the exception of the Teensy 4.1 microcontroller, the enclosure and the printed circuit board or PCB. And this is where today's sponsor, PCBWAY, comes in. PCBWAY is an online PCB prototyping service. You can upload schematics to the webpage and they'll print them and send them to you within a couple of days. But they also have this creator program that lets you order specific parts directly from their online store, and then the creator gets a share of the revenue. In case of MicroDexed Touch, you can buy both the enclosure and the PCB directly, supporting its developer while doing so. My parts arrived within 4 days and they came out great. I opted for a black screen cover and a white enclosure, which I think looks very nice indeed. I also got 5 PCBs because that's the minimum number you can order. Begin the build by uploading the firmware to the Teensy microcontroller. Connect it to your PC by USB and download the Teensy app. Start the app and push the button on the Teensy. Then select the firmware file. If you bought the newest MicroDexed board at PCBWAY, the file you want to use is named mft_flash_capacitive_buttons_interface.hex. I'm still not great at soldering things, and some people might sneer at my battery-powered soldering iron. I found it to be perfectly up to the task, however. One thing I can't recommend enough is solder that already has flux inside it. Not only will the solder melt faster, it will also sit exactly where you want it to be. You'll also need a pair of pincers and a sponge to clean your soldering iron. Overall, the build consists of relatively uncomplicated through-hole soldering mostly, but there's still a lot of things that can go wrong due to the sheer number of parts here. It's better to have a tiny bit of experience for this. I assembled my kit in the order the parts arrived, so here I'm pushing the 3.5mm MIDI and audio jacks into the board, then soldering them in place. Next, the optocoupler and its socket and the socket headers for the Teensy microcontroller arrived, so I put them into place. Basically, this board is full of these sockets, and that's great, because it enables you to easily remove and swap parts to use them somewhere else if you want to do so. Here's the USB port. You can use this to connect MIDI controllers to MicroDexed. Here are the socket headers for the Teensy's 4 USB pins. Be careful to have them standing up straight, otherwise pushing the Teensy into these sockets later will be quite complicated. The next part is the socket for the screen. Please be aware I used half-size sockets instead of full-sized one here, just because I had so many left of these. I later just stacked another row of these on top of the other. But the schematics want you to use a full-size socket for the screen, so please use one of those. Once again, make sure the socket is standing up straight, otherwise you won't be able to assemble the enclosure later. Here you can see me cutting the sockets into smaller bits. I found this is cheaper than buying the correctly sized ones online. Always wear eye protection when doing this. Right, all the sockets are in place now. We also need some angled headers for connecting the two encoders. Once again, just buying normal sized ones and cutting them into smaller bits is much cheaper, so that's what I did. Now, some jumper headers. The jumpers can be used to turn on or off the headphone amplifier, set up MIDI, TRS A or B type, and other things. It's not important to get these perfectly straight, but it looks nicer if they are. Now, attach the two push buttons and solder them in place. This should be straightforward. Now it's time to add the resistors and the diode. If you don't want to decipher the colored rings yourself, I can recommend this electronic parts identifier, which will tell you the specification of most electronic parts with the press of a button. The diode has a black ring, which needs to face the direction of the thick white line printed onto the PCB. Remember to cut the diodes and resistors legs after soldering them in place. All the resistors are in place and I'm quite pleased with my work so far. Building these contraptions is really satisfying after all. Here I'm soldering some legs to the flash RAM chip. For this I pushed the legs into one of the sockets to keep them straight. Now we can cut away the upper pins as they get in the way of the display we'll add later. Push the flash RAM chip into its socket. Here I had to cut away a bit of the pins, but you can avoid this by pushing them through the chip from the other side in the first place. Solder the pins into the audio board and the amplifier as well and push them into place. Next I pushed the teensy microcontroller into place, which was an exercise in patience. I recommend pushing onto the corners one after the other lightly, pushing the pins in only a little bit, then moving on to the next corner, repeating the process step by step until the controller sits on its socket flush to the ground. Then check your encoders. If they have SMD resistors like this one, cut those away. Remember to wear eye protection while doing that. Now download the zip file containing the patches and samples and extract them to an SD card so that the 3 folders are in the SD card's root directory. Insert the card into the teensy's SD card slot. Connect the encoders to the main board and then attach them to the screen cover. You can now slide the board into the enclosure, put the screen onto its socket and put the screen cover onto it. I later added some screws to hold the screen in place, but these arrived shortly before finishing the video only, so you won't see that here. And with that, the build is finished. Fingers crossed, plug in a micro USB cable and your MicroDexed should boot. But before we start making music, it's time for this.
Get down, baby, get down. Right on, get down.
Okay, MicroDexed Touch. I won't go into all the details of this box in this video, that would be too much. I made a video on this 2 years ago, the basic concepts haven't changed that much, but we've got some new features here, among them this beautiful new capacitive touch screen and the live sequencer. And now there's a flash drive built into this. So the first thing you want to do when turning this on for the first time is to format the drive and copy the samples to it. Use the right knob to scroll through menus and use the left knob to move the cursor around or to adjust the volume. Go to the system menu and then go to the format flash menu. Then push this encoder down and confirm you want to do that. Now we have to wait until this is formatted here. Okay, formatting is done. Now go back to this menu by pushing down the left encoder, and then we want to go to the file manager. You can use the touch screen, press the copy preset button, and then push down the right encoder. I can see the system is copying all those samples to the flash RAM. Once you've finished copying, you can then push the left encoder to go back to the main menu. Okay, let's take a look at the plugins now. We've got two instances of DEXT, which is a Yamaha DX7 emulator. Use the right encoder to go to the patch selection screen and hold down the right encoder to switch between instance 1 and 2 here. So for example, we've got this bass patch. And on the second instance, we've got this synth pad sound. You can see we can edit a lot of things here directly on this box. We can also edit the patch itself, but we won't do that. That would be beyond the scope of this video. I'll just continue to the electric piano. And I think for most people, having an electric piano box of this size would be an argument to buy this. And this one sounds really good. There's a lot of things you can adjust here. For example, let's adjust the overdrive. So go here and turn this all the way up. Microsynth is a virtual analog synth. This is a one oscillator virtual analog synth, but there are two instances of this, so if you map them to the same MIDI output, you'll have a two oscillator virtual analog synth, and that's what I did here to have this slightly fatter lead sound. Next is Braids, which also is a virtual analog or wavetable synthesizer. Next up is the multisampler. This one can be used for creating sampled instruments like a Roland. So you can assign samples to a keyboard, then play them on the keyboard, and this way you can create realistic sounding pianos or whatever you like. Then we have the drum computer, and the drum computer is a simple sampler. You can assign samples to a certain key on a keyboard, and then you can use that to play drums, for example. The live sequencer is the most fun addition to this box, and let's take a look at that. Okay, the live sequencer. So go to the song sequencer first. This is a traditional tracker type sequencer that, for example, Dirty Wave M8 users should feel right at home with. We've got a tracks, we've got a chains, we've got a patterns, but we'll adjust here to use this instrument assignment here. So we've got a drum track and instrument tracks, and we've got a drum kit on channel 1, electric piano on track 2, DEXT on track 3 and 4, and then braids and minisynth on tracks 5 and 6. So that's okay. Now go to the live sequencer. What we see here is an overview of 6 tracks. We can now record while this thing is doing its perpetual loop over 4 bars or measures of music. So press start. Now I'm going to create a drum track, and I won't record anything, but instead I'll set the number here to 4 and select the bass drum on the keyboard. Now I will fill this. Once this goes around, you can now hear the bass drum playing its 4 to the floor beat. Now enter 16th notes, play a hi-hat and fill, and now we should hear the hi-hat. Nice. And now I'm going to record this snare drum. Nice. Now if you go to the tools view, you can see we've created layers here. So now I can turn on and off individual drum samples here. Let's create the electric piano track. I will just try something first. Let's go an octave deeper. Okay, let's try something. So press record and wait till this goes around. Okay. Let's try bass now. Okay, let's try something. Okay, now let's record braids. Now I can just jam on top of this, like this. Yeah, that's the live sequencer. As you've probably imagined, lots of fun, and that's all I'm going to show in this video. There are a lot of more functions in this box, and like on the Qn Mark II last week, there is only so much time to show everything. So if you're interested in follow-up videos, please leave a comment under this video. Thank you very much.
Here are a couple of noteworthy things that didn't make it into the video before the cut. Don't use big SD cards. Sizes between 8 and 32 GB are perfectly fine for MicroDexed. Larger sizes will not work. If the 3D printed enclosure seems too pricey, you can also use a PCB enclosure, as seen in the video now. These two are available at PCBWAY, and a share goes to MicroDexed Creator. Yes, you can load original DX7 sysx files into MicroDexed to use the original patches. Just drop them onto the SD card into the patches folder.
Yeah, and that's it for today. MicroDexed Touch, an open source groovebox, sequencer, FM and virtual analog synthesizer in a tiny and portable form factor. Building this is neither cheap or easy, but in this price range there's nothing comparable on the market, be it commercial or open source or DIY. Since I last reviewed this 2 years ago on this channel, a lot of updates have been added, and there have been no less than 4 firmware updates while I filmed this video. So if you think this was a good YouTube video, please do the YouTube thing. And you can also support me financially by joining my Patreon, buying some music on Bandcamp, hitting the super thanks button, or joining my YouTube community using the buttons under this video. But of course, nothing of this is mandatory. As always, Thanks for watching, and see you again very, very soon. Bye bye.